When I found that small, worn key tucked inside the lining of his old wallet, my hands went cold, as if the metal itself carried the chill of secrets long buried. It was just days after we'd laid him to rest, and there I was, sitting alone in our quiet living room. The scent of lilies from the funeral still lingering in the air like a ghost that wouldn't leave. I'd always known about those Tuesday trips to the bank every week for 38 years, like clockwork. He'd kiss me goodbye, say he was handling a bit of business, and return with that same gentle smile. Never a word more. But holding that key, labeled with the bank's insignia and a box number I didn't recognize. I felt a crack form in the foundation of our life together. Why hide this? What had he been doing all those years that he couldn't share with me, his wife of nearly 4 decades? I sat there for what felt like hours, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall echoing through the empty house. Our home had always been a place of warmth. Faded floral curtains I'd sewn myself, the worn leather armchair where he'd read the newspaper every evening, his pipe resting on the side table, still carrying the faint aroma of cherry tobacco. But now, it all feels hollow. I traced the key's edges with my thumb, remembering how dependable he'd been, how he'd built our life brick by brick. And yet, this tiny object whispered of something unspoken, something that made my heart ache with a mix of grief and unease. I didn't want to doubt him. Not now, not after he'd gone. But the questions gnawed at me, pulling me toward the bank like an invisible thread. What if this was the key to understanding the man I'd loved? Or worse, what if it unlocked a door I'd never wanted to open? The next morning, I dressed carefully, as if preparing for a solemn occasion, my black wool coat, the one he'd bought me for our 30th anniversary, and a scarf to ward off the autumn chill. The drive to the bank was familiar. We'd gone together countless times for mundane things like deposits or loans, but this time, my palms were slick on the steering wheel, and the radio's soft jazz did little to calm the flutter in my chest. When I arrived, the teller, a young woman with kind eyes, led me to the vault after I showed her the key and my identification. "Mrs. Harlan," she said softly, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Harlan was always such a gentleman." Her words stung, a reminder of the respect he'd earned from strangers. While I sat here, unraveling a mystery, she unlocked the safety deposit box and left me in the small viewing room, the door clicking shut behind her. Inside the box was a stack of envelopes, yellowed with age, and a leather-bound ledger. My breath caught as I opened the first envelope. Bank statements dating back decades, showing weekly deposits into an account I'd never known about. Small amounts at first, $50 here, $100 there, growing over time. But it wasn't the money that made me freeze. It was the name on the beneficiary line, for Elena Ramirez and family. Who was Elena? The name meant nothing to me, yet it sliced through my grief like a knife. I flipped through the ledger, next meticulous entries in his handwriting, noting each Tuesday visit, each deposit, with notes like for school fees or medical expenses. My mind reeled. Had he been supporting another woman? Another life? The room spun, and I gripped the table, the cold metal under my fingers grounding me just enough to keep from crumbling. But let me take you back, before all this, to the life we shared, the one that felt so solid, so unshakable. It started in the spring of 1987, when I met Thomas at a church picnic in our small town of Willow Creek. I was 22, fresh out of nursing school, with dreams of helping people and building a family. He was 25, already working as a mechanic at the local garage, his hands calloused but gentle. He had this quiet strength about him, the kind that made you feel safe without him ever raising his voice. We'd sit on the porch swing after dates, sipping lemonade, talking about the future, the house we'd buy, the children we'd raise. "Evelyn," he'd say, his voice low and steady, "with you, I can see it all clearly." We married that fall, in a simple ceremony with wildflowers and homemade cake, surrounded by family who clapped and cheered as if we'd won some grand prize. Our days settled into a rhythm that became the heartbeat of our marriage. Thomas worked long hours at the garage, coming home with grease under his nails and a tired smile that lit up when he saw me. I'd be in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew or baking bread, the aroma filling the house like a warm embrace. We'd eat dinner at the oak table his father had built, talking about the day's small triumphs, a patient I'd comforted at the hospital, a tricky engine he'd fixed. Our 2 children came along soon after, Sarah in 1990, with her father's thoughtful eyes, and Michael 2 years later, full of energy and laughter. Family life was our anchor. Weekends meant picnics by the creek, where the kids splashed in the shallow water, their giggles mixing with the rustle of leaves. Thomas would hoist Michael onto his shoulders, pretending to be a giant, while Sarah and I picked berries, our fingers stained purple, Those Tuesday bank visits started early in our marriage, right after we bought the house. Just handling some finances. Love, he'd say, pecking my cheek before heading out. I never questioned it. Money matters were his domain, and I trusted him implicitly. He managed our bills with precision, always ensuring we had enough for the kids' school clothes or a modest vacation to the coast. Our home was modest but filled with love, the scent of fresh laundry on the line, the sound of Thomas humming old folk tunes while fixing a leaky faucet, the way he'd wrap his arm around me on quiet evenings, his breath warm against my hair. "You're my everything, Evelyn," he'd whisper, and I'd believe it, because why wouldn't I? Life wasn't perfect. There were arguments over little things, like his stubbornness about asking for help, or my tendency to worry too much. But we weathered them, growing closer with each passing year. As the children grew, our routines evolved. Sarah excelled in school, dreaming of becoming a teacher, while Michael took after his father, tinkering with cars in the driveway. Thomas was there for it all, coaching Little League, attending parent-teacher conferences, his presence a steady constant, even in tougher times, like when I lost my job at the hospital during cutbacks in 2008. He held me close and said, "We'll get through this." Together, he picked up extra shifts, and we made do, tightening our belts without complaint. Those Tuesdays continued, unchanging, a ritual as familiar as Sunday church. I'd wave from the window as he drove off, never imagining there was more to it than routine banking. How could I? He was my rock, the man who remembered anniversaries with a single rose from our garden, who held my hand through the births of our children and the loss of my parents. Our life was ordinary, but it was ours, woven with threads of trust and quiet affection. Yet, looking back, there were tiny fissures I overlooked: the way he'd sometimes stare out the window after returning from the bank, his eyes distant, as if carrying an unseen weight, or how he'd deflect when I casually asked about our savings, saying, "All in order, dear," with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But in the warmth of our daily life, those moments faded, dismissed as the quirks of a man who'd shouldered much alone, until now, with him gone, and this box of secrets staring back at me. The first real crack appeared about 15 years into our marriage, though I didn't recognize it then. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind where the wind rattles the windows and the sky stays the color of a bruised peach. Thomas came home later than usual, nearly supper time. His coat smelled of rain and something faintly medicinal, like hospital antiseptic. I remember standing at the stove, stirring chicken soup, when he walked in. His face was pale, the lines around his eyes deeper than I'd ever seen them. "You're late," I said lightly, tasting the broth. "Everything is all right at the bank." He hung his hat on the peg by the door, slow as an old man. "Just a long line," he answered, voice rough. Then he did something he rarely did. He came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and rested his chin on my shoulder. He held me like that for a long while, longer than a simple greeting, as if he were borrowing strength. I felt his heart beating fast against my back. "Thomas," I turned in his arms. "You're trembling." He kissed my forehead, quick and dry. "Cold out there, that's all." Then he let go and went to wash up, and the moment slipped away like smoke. That night, after the children were asleep, I found him in the garage long past midnight. The single bulb above the workbench glowed yellow. He sat on a stool, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. A half-finished carburetor lay forgotten on the bench. When I touched his shoulder, he startled, then gave me a tired smile. "Can't sleep?" I asked. "Thinking about the old days," he said. "Before we had all this." He gestured vaguely at the house, the life we'd built. I thought he meant money worries. Times were tight then, with Sarah needing braces and the roof leaking in 2 places. I never dreamed he meant something else entirely. The Tuesdays kept coming, steady as church bells. Sometimes he'd bring home a small treat, peppermint candies for the kids, or a bar of my favorite lavender soap. Once, he came in carrying a single white camellia, slightly crushed. "Found it on the sidewalk outside the bank," he said, tucking it behind my ear. His fingers lingered at my temple. I laughed and told him he was being sentimental. He only smiled, eyes soft and sad in a way I couldn't place. Years rolled on. The children grew taller than us. Sarah married Daniel, a quiet accountant who adored her, and gave us to grandbabies Ali, with her wild curls, and Benjamin, who had Thomas's thoughtful frown even at age 4. Michael joined the army, came home safe, then opened his own garage on the edge of town. Life widened, then narrowed again as my parents passed and friends moved away. Through it all, Tuesdays belonged to the bank. I teased him sometimes. "One day I'm going to follow you, Mr. Mysterious," I'd say over coffee. He'd chuckle. That low rumble I loved. Nothing to see, Evie. Just an old man signing papers. But there were other small things. The way he'd flinch if the phone rang late. How he kept an old road atlas in the glove compartment. Pages worn soft at one particular Chris downtown, near the children's hospital 2 towns over. I noticed once when I was looking for the ice scraper. I asked why that page was so battered. He shrugged and said he'd been checking routes for a customer. I believed him. Trust is a habit. You see, after 38 years, it becomes muscle memory. Then came the heart attack. It was sudden, merciless. We were in the garden, he was tying up the tomato plants, humming Amazing Grace off-key the way he always did. I was deadheading roses. He straightened up, pressed a hand to his chest, and looked at me with such surprise in his eyes. I caught him before he hit the ground. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and my own voice begging him to stay. In the hospital they said it was massive. He lingered 3 days, unconscious most of it. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, telling him about the ordinary things, the way the hydrangeas were blooming, how Lily had lost her first tooth. On the 3rd morning he opened his eyes, looked right at me, and tried to speak. The only word I caught was sorry. Then the machines screamed and the nurses pushed me gently into the hall. After the funeral, the house was too quiet. The grandchildren's toys lay abandoned in the living room like bright little ghosts. Sarah kept bringing Michael mowed the lawn without being asked. Everyone tiptoed around me, afraid I'd shatter. I didn't cry much in front of them. I saved it for the shower, where the water hid the sound. A week later, I began the awful task of sorting his things. That's when I found the key slipped into a tear in the old wallet he'd carried since 1995. The wallet itself was soft as cloth, the leather cracked along the folds. Inside the tear, wrapped in a bit of tissue, lay the safety deposit key and a folded scrap of paper. On it, in his careful mechanic's handwriting, was the box number and the words, "If anything happens to me, give Evelyn the key. She deserves to know." I sat on the bedroom floor amid piles of his shirts still smelling faintly of motor oil and the cedar soap he loved, and felt the first cold finger of dread trace my spine. The next day I went to the bank. I've already told you what I found in that metal box. The envelopes, the ledger, the name Elena Ramirez, but I haven't told you about the photograph tucked beneath the ledger like an afterthought. It was old, edges curled, a young woman maybe 25 standing beside a boy of 8 or 9. Dark hair, dark eyes, both of them smiling shyly at the camera. On the back, in Thomas's writing, Elena and Matteo, 1992. My breath stopped. The boy had Thomas's mouth, the same curve, the same dimple in the left cheek. I don't know how long I sat there staring. Minutes, maybe an hour. The vault room had no windows. Time felt suspended. When the teller knocked softly to check on me, I startled so badly the photo fluttered to the floor. "Mrs. Harlan, are you all right?" I wasn't, but I gathered everything back into the box with shaking hands, thanked her, and walked out into the October sunlight, feeling as if the world had tilted on its axis. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Thomas's armchair with the ledger open on my lap, reading by lamplight. Every entry has a knife twist. 1992. $75. Matteo school uniform 1994. $400. Elena hospital appendectomy, 1998. $1,200. Braces for Matteo 2005. $5,000. Community college tuition 2011. $800. Elena new furnace. 2023. $600. Matteo and Sophia wedding gift page after page. 38 years of quiet, steady giving. The amounts grew as his garage prospered, but never extravagant. Always just enough to keep a family afloat. My husband had another family. Not a mistress he'd never touched another woman. I would have known, but a son. A secret son, born before we met, hidden all these years. And Elena, she'd never asked for more than help. Never disrupted our life. They'd kept the secret together. All 3 of them, while I baked pies and cheered at soccer games and believed I knew my husband's whole heart. I closed the ledger and pressed it to my chest. The tears came then, hot and silent, sliding down into the collar of my NIGHTGOWN. How do you mourn a man you thought you knew completely, only to discover there was an entire continent of him you'd never walked? The days after blurred into one long ache. I locked the ledger and photo away in my dresser drawer, beneath folded linens that still carried the faint scent of his aftershave. I couldn't bear to look at them again, not yet, but they haunted me. The boy's dimple, Elena's shy smile, the meticulous entries that spanned our entire marriage. I went through the motions, answering sympathy calls with a steady voice. Watering the plants he'd tended, folding laundry in neat piles. Sarah noticed something off during her visits. "Mom, you're quiet," she'd say, setting a cup of tea before me. I'd smile and blame grief, which wasn't entirely a lie. How could I tell her? How could I shatter the memory of her father with this? I needed answers. So, on a crisp Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after finding the key, I drove to the address I'd pieced together from the ledger's scattered notes. An apartment complex in River, 20 miles away, near the hospital where those medical payments had gone. The building was modest, brick faded by years, with flower boxes in a few windows. I parked across the street, heart pounding like a trapped bird. What was I doing? Spying like some jealous wife in a bad novel. But I had to see her, this Alina, to make her real instead of a ghost in my head. I waited an hour before a woman emerged from Unit 12, carrying grocery bags. She was in her 60s, like me, silver threaded through, dark hair pulled into a bun, posture straight but weary. She wore a simple cardigan and jeans, nothing flashy. As she loaded the bags into an old sedan, a man in his 30s approached, tall, with Thomas's build, helping her without a word. Mateo, it had to be. They laughed softly about something, his hand on her shoulder in that easy, familiar way sons have with mothers. My throat tightened. He had Thomas's laugh, too, that quiet rumble. I didn't confront them then. I drove home, shaking, pulled over twice to steady my breath. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water I didn't drink, turning the facts over like stones. Thomas must have met Alina before me, perhaps, during his time in the army, stationed near the border. The dates lined up. Mateo born in 1984, 3 years before our wedding. Why hide it? Shame. Fear I'd leave, or maybe Alina had insisted on silence, building her own life without demands. The ledger showed no resentment, only due to quiet, unwavering support, scraped from our modest means. He'd skimmed from bonuses, over time, even our vacation fund once or twice. Small betrayals stacked into a mountain. The confrontation came unbidden. I'd decided to write Alina a letter, polite, seeking truth without accusation. But before I could, the phone rang late one evening. An unfamiliar number. I answered, voice cautious. "Is this Evelyn Harlan?" A woman's voice, soft with a faint accent. "Yes. Who's calling?" A pause, heavy as fog. "This is Alina Ramirez. I think we need to talk." My hand gripped the receiver until my knuckles whitened. How did she know? Thomas must have left instructions, or perhaps the bank notified her of his passing. She sounded as weary as I felt. We met the next day at a neutral place, a quiet cafe midway between our towns. I arrived early, choosing a corner booth where the vinyl seats stuck slightly to my skirt. The air smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls, ordinary scents that felt mocking. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately from the photo, older now. Lines etched around her eyes, but the same gentle poise. She slid into the seat across from me, hands folded on the table. "Mrs. Harlan of Alimus, so sorry for your loss. Thomas was a good man." I nodded, throat tight. "How did you know him?" She looked down, tracing a finger along the table's edge. "We met in 1983, when he was on leave. It was brief, a summer thing. I was young, foolish. When I found out about Mateo, Thomas offered to marry me. But I said no. I didn't want to trap him. He had dreams, a life ahead. So we agreed he'd help from afar, quietly, no strings. And he did," I said, voice steady despite the storm inside. "Every Tuesday for 38 years. Her eyes met mine, filled with regret. "He loved you. He told me about you early on, how kind you were, how you built a home. He never wanted to hurt you. That's why the secrecy." "But it did hurt," I whispered. "Finding out like this, after he's gone. Why not tell me? I would have understood, helped, even." Alina sighed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Pride, maybe, fear. He said once that admitting it would make him less in your eyes. And I built my own life. Remarried briefly, divorced. Mateo knows about his father. Thomas visited a few times a year, always discreet, but we respected the boundary. We talked for hours. She shared stories, Thomas teaching Mateo to ride a bike in a park far from home, sending cards on birthdays. Mateo had become an engineer, married with a daughter now, Thomas's granddaughter, one I'd never known. The betrayal stung deepest there, not the money, but the hidden branches of his heart. "Why now?" I asked as we finished our coffee, grown cold. "Thomas left a letter with his lawyer for me to contact you if he passed first. He wanted you to know the truth from me, not cold papers. And ... He left the account to Matteo, but with a note saying to share if you needed. I left the cafe numb, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot like brittle bones. Driving home, tears blurred the road, not just grief, but anger at Thomas for the lie, at myself, for blindness, at Alina for her quiet complicity. Our marriage, once a sanctuary, now felt like a house with hidden rooms. That evening, I called Sarah and Michael over. They arrived worried, faces etched with concern. We sat in the living room, the same floral sofa where Thomas had read bedtime stories. I laid it all out, the key, the box, Elena's story. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Michael paced, fists clenched. Dad had a son, Sarah whispered. All this time. Michael stopped, face reddening. How could he? Taking from us, from our family. Not talking, I said softly. Giving. He stretched what we had. We never went without. But the hurt was there, raw and real. We cried together, a tangle of arms and tissues. Later, Michael hugged me tight. What do we do now, Mom? I didn't know, but as they left, promising to return soon, a plan formed. Not revenge. Tomas was gone, and Alina hadn't sought harm, but action, to reclaim what was mine, the full truth, and perhaps a bridge across the chasm he'd left. The next morning, I wrote to Matteo, not accusatory, but inviting. Your father was my world, I began. I'd like to know the part of him that was yours. 2 days later, he called, voice deep, like Thomas's. Mrs. Harlan, I'd like that too. We met at the same cafe. Matteo arrived with his wife, Sophia, warm woman, with kind eyes, and their little girl, Anna, who clutched a stuffed bear. She had Thomas's dimple. We talked haltingly at first. He shared memories. Thomas fixing his first car, advice on college, quiet pride at his wedding. He always spoke of you with love, Matteo said. Said you were the strongest person he knew. I told stories of our life, the picnics, the holidays, the way Thomas hummed while working. Anna toddled over, offering me her bear. I held her, the weight small and trusting. And something inside me softened, as the weeks unfolded. That initial meeting with Matteo bloomed into something tentative but real. We didn't rush. Grief doesn't allow for haste, but we found a rhythm. He'd call every few days, sharing snippets of his life. Anna's first steps, a promotion at work, the way he fixed cars just like Thomas had taught him. I'd listen, voice steady, and offer bits of our world. Sarah's garden blooming early. Michael's latest project at the garage. Sophia sent photos, Anna in a sundress, waving at the camera with that familiar dimple. I printed one and placed it on the mantle, next to a family shot from our last Christmas with Thomas. It felt strange at first, like inviting a shadow into the light. But it eased the ache a fraction. My reaction wasn't anger anymore. Not the boiling kind. It had cooled into a quiet resolve, to weave this hidden thread into the fabric of our family, rather than let it unravel us. I couldn't confront Thomas, but I could honor the man he was by extending the grace he'd given quietly for so long. So, I planned a gathering. Not a confrontation, but an introduction. I invited Alina, Matteo, Sophia, and Anna to our home for a Sunday lunch. Sarah and Michael agreed, though warily. Are you sure, Mom? Sarah asked, stirring sugar into her tea during one of our kitchen talks. Her eyes searched mine, full of that protective worry daughters carry. Yes, I said, patting her hand. Your father kept this separate to protect us. But secrets don't heal. Sharing does. Michael was harder to convince. He paced the porch the night before, hands in pockets. It feels like betrayal, Mom. All those years. I nodded, the evening air cool on my skin. It was. Buddy was still your dad, the one who taught you everything. Let's see if we can find room for more. The day arrived with spring's hesitant warmth. I rose early, baking Thomas's favorite apple pie, the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filling the house like a balm. I set the table with our good china, the one with faint gold rims we'd used for holidays. Flowers from the garden in a vase, daffodils nodding yellow heads. When they knocked, my heart stuttered. But I opened the door with a smile. Alina entered first, carrying a covered dish tamales. She said, a family recipe. Matteo followed Anna in his arms, Sophia beside him with a bottle of wine. They looked as nervous as I felt, eyes darting around the living room where Thomas's pipe still sat on the shelf. Come in, I said, voice warm. Make yourselves at home. Sarah and Michael arrived soon after, the grandchildren in tow. Lily eyed Anna curiously, then offered a toy truck. Benjamin hung back, thumb in mouth. We sat awkwardly at first, small talk about the weather and the drive. Then, over salad, Alina spoke. I never meant to intrude, she said softly, folding her napkin. Thomas, he was honorable. He wanted the best for all of us. Michael cleared his throat. Why not tell us sooner? We could have known our brother. Matteo met his gaze. Dad thought it would complicate things. I respected that, but I'm glad to be here now. The words hung. Then Sarah reached across the table. Tell us about him, your memories. Stories flowed then, halting at first, then easier. Matteo described Thomas showing up for his high school graduation, sitting in the back row, beaming. Alina shared how he'd wired money for Matteo's first apartment. With a note, build something good. I added our tales, the time Thomas rebuilt an old swing set for the kids, or how he'd dance with me in the kitchen to no music. Laughter came. Tentative, then genuine. Anna and Lily played on the rug, their giggles bridging the gaps. By dessert, the air had lightened. Michael showed Matteo the garage, tools glinting under the light. Dad's old set, Michael said. He'd want you to see it. Matteo ran a hand over the workbench. He taught me one just like this. Alina and I lingered at the table, coffee cups warm in our hands. Thank you, she whispered. For this, I nodded. It's what he would have wanted, eventually. They left as the sun dipped, hugs exchanged awkward but sincere. Anna waved from the car window, and I stood on the porch, watching them go, a mix of exhaustion and peace settling over me. But actions have ripples. Word spread in our small town, as it always does. A neighbor mentioned seeing strangers at my house during coffee at the diner. Whispers at church. Evelyn's got a family we didn't know about. I ignored it at first, focusing on my own healing. Then came the call from Pastor Reed. Evelyn, folks are talking. Is everything all right? I sighed, twisting the phone cord. Thomas had a son from before we met. We're making peace with it. He paused. That's unexpected. If you need to talk, I appreciate it, Pastor, but we're handling it as a family. The community reacted in layers, some with sympathy, others with judgment veiled as concern. At the grocery store, Mrs. Ellis from down the street cornered me by the produce. Heard about your husband's other life. It must be a shock. Her voice carried that faux kindness, eyes hungry for details. I straightened, basket heavy on my arm. But Thomas was a good man who did right by everyone. That's what matters. She blinked, nodded quickly, and moved on. Others were kindercards in the mail. Offers of casseroles, again. Families come in all shapes. One note read. It warmed me. Those quiet supports. The real consequence hit Alina and Matteo harder, in their own circles. Alina confided during a phone call that her sister had scolded her for the secrecy. She says I should have told you years ago. Matteo mentioned awkward questions at work, friends prying, but they faced it with the same quiet dignity Thomas had instilled. For our family, the public eye brought us closer. Sarah hosted the next gathering at her home, inviting everyone. Michael shared tools with Matteo via mail, a wrench set with a note from Dad's collection. The grandchildren played without a hint of division, their innocence a lesson in itself. As months passed, the whispers faded. Thomas's memory shifted, not tarnished, but fuller. At his graveside one afternoon, I sat on the grass, tracing his name on the stone. You should have trusted me, I murmured, but I understand now. Love isn't simple. A breeze stirred the leaves, carrying the scent of fresh earth. I left a camellia there, the flower he'd once given me, and walked away lighter. Healing came in small measures. I returned to volunteering at the hospital, hands busy with tasks that helped others. Evenings, I'd sit on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance, reflecting on the life we'd built. The ledger stayed in the drawer, a reminder not of betrayal, but of a man's quiet efforts to do right. One evening, Matteo called with news. Sophia was expecting a boy, he said. We'd like to name him Thomas, if that's okay. Tears pricked my eyes. It would honor him. We gathered for the birth. Months later, our blended family in the waiting room, coffee cups in hand. When they brought the baby out, tiny and red-faced, I held him close. He had the family dimple, a thread connecting us all. In time, holidays merged, Thanksgiving at my house, with tamales beside the turkey, laughter filling the rooms. Alina became a friend, sharing recipes over tea. The children, now cousins, built forts in the yard, their voices a chorus of joy. I found peace in the ordinary again, the tick of the clock, the aroma of baking bread, the warmth of a quilt on cool nights. Thomas's absence remained hollow, but it was filled with new voices, new bonds. Life, I learned, isn't about perfect stories. It's about mending the breaks with grace. Forgiveness didn't come all at once. It was like mending a quilt, stitch by careful stitch. Some days, the hurt resurfaced, sharp as a thorn, finding an old receipt in his desk drawer for a toy truck sent to Matteo on his 10th birthday. or catching a whiff of cherry tobacco on a passerby's coat, I'd pause, breath caught, and let the wave pass. But more often, the new connections brought light. Anna's first birthday party at Mateo's home, balloons bobbing in the breeze, the scent of fresh cake mingling with laughter. Lily and Benjamin chased her around the yard, their small feet pattering on the grass. Alina and I sat on the patio, sipping iced tea, sharing quiet stories of motherhood's trials. Thomas would be proud, she said, her voice soft. I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. I took small steps toward my own renewal, joined a book club at the library, where the rustle of pages and murmured discussions filled Tuesday afternoons that had once been empty. Volunteered more at the hospital, holding hands with patients whose eyes held the same quiet fear I'd seen in Thomas's that last day. One evening, as I walked home under a canopy of stars, I realized the house no longer echoed with silence. It hummed with life phone calls from Mateo about the baby's first words, packages from Sophia with handmade scarves, visits from Sarah bearing fresh bread. The community adjusted to. After the initial buzz, acceptance crept in. At church potlucks, folks stopped whispering and started asking genuine questions. How's that new grandson? Mrs. Ellis inquired one Sunday. Her tone shifted from prying to kind. I smiled and shared a photo from my purse. Little Thomas with his tuft of dark hair, growing like a weed. She patted my arm. Family's a blessing, no matter how it comes. It wasn't perfect. Some judgments lingered in sidelong glances, but I held my head high, drawing strength from the dignity Thomas had always shown. Michael and Mateo bonded over engines, spending weekends in the garage. He moves just like Dad, Michael said one night, grease on his cheek as he washed up at the sink. It's weird, but good. Sarah found common ground with Sophia in gardening tips, exchanging seeds through the mail. Alina visited for holidays, her tamales becoming a staple beside my stuffing. We weren't seamless. Awkward pauses still arose, old wounds twinging, but we chose grace each time. One crisp fall day, a year after Thomas's passing, I drove to the cemetery alone. The leaves crunched underfoot, carrying the earthy scent of change. I knelt by his stone, brushing away fallen twigs. I forgive you, I whispered, for the secret, for the fear. You gave so much love, even if it was divided. Tears fell, but they were cleansing, not bitter. As I stood, a robin landed nearby, tilting its head as if listening. I smiled through the blurtiness. Had always said birds carried messages from the gone. That winter, we gathered for Christmas, our fullest table yet. The house glowed with lights strung by the grandchildren, the air rich with pine and roasting turkey. Anna toddled to me, arms outstretched, and I lifted her onto my lap, her small hand patting my cheek. Mateo raised a glass. To Dad, to Thomas, for bringing us here. We toasted, eyes meeting across the table. A tapestry of faces bound by one man's quiet choices. Healing deepened as time wove on. I traveled for the first time alone to the coast we'd visited as a young couple. The salt air stung my eyes, waves crashing like old memories. I scattered a pinch of his ashes there, whispering farewells. Back home, I redecorated slowly, new curtains in soft blue, a painting of wildflowers on the wall. The changes felt like breaths, expanding the space for new joys. 2 years passed. Mateo and Sophia asked me to move closer, into a guest house on their property. I considered it over tea with Alina. It would mean leaving this home, I said, gesturing at the familiar walls. She nodded. But gaining another. Thomas would want you surrounded by love. I agreed, packing boxes with Kara's pipe tucked safely among books, the ledger now a family heirloom shared openly. The move was bittersweet, saying goodbye to the garden he'd planted. Hello to mornings with Anna's laughter drifting through open windows. In this new chapter, I found unexpected strength, started a small support group at the local center for blended families, sharing our story to help others navigate secrets and surprises. Love expands, I'd tell them, voice calm. It doesn't divide unless we let it. The moral settled in me like roots. Trust can fracture, but forgiveness rebuilds stronger foundations. Thomas's legacy wasn't the deception, but the devotion that spanned 2 worlds. As I sit now on my new porch, watching the sunset over hills dotted with wildflowers, peace wraps around me like a well-worn shawl. Life goes on, not flawless, but fuller than I imagined. The Tuesdays that once held mystery now hold memory. A reminder that even in hidden corners, goodness can thrive. And so, my dears, that's the story of those Tuesday trips. 38 years of quiet love I never knew about, and the family I never expected to find. Sometimes the people we love most carry pieces of their heart we'll never hold. Sometimes the truth hurts like salt in a wound, and sometimes, grace is simply deciding to love anyway. If you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything, if you've had to choose between bitterness and forgiveness, tell me quietly in the comments. Would you have opened your door the way I did? Thank you for sitting with me tonight. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that healing is possible. And until next time, take care of your hearts. I'll see you soon.